It is one thing to have a bad idea for your story, but it's incredibly terrible and insulting to stumble onto a good idea and not do anything fun or creative with it. Hello, I am the Script Doctor. It's time to take a look at Batwoman again. If there's one thing the show does well, it's succeeding in disappointment. Today's episode follows a villain of the week formula where a man dressed as an executioner targets 3 public servants and kills them using methods of capital punishment. On the surface, this concept is a really good idea. Does Batwoman recognize it's a good idea and take it to its full potential? We'll find out as we break down episode 6, I'll Be Judge, I'll Be Jury. The episode opens up with a man mumbling into a phone. I'm not kidding. I had to watch this moment 4 times to figure out what he was saying because his enunciation is terrible. And that's coming from me, a guy who trips over his own tongue quite often. Based on what he dribbles out, he appears to be a lawyer who has a brave witness coming forward to testify. He hangs up his call as he approaches his car to see an electrical pole tip over and smash his vehicle. Our episode's villain, the executioner, appropriately dressed and carrying an axe, strolls over to a fire hydrant next to the lawyer's car. And here is where we stop. I'm going to get a little bit ahead of myself here because this mistake needs to be pointed out. This man we're seeing here is a district attorney. Later on in this episode, we learn that he's a very good and well-respected DA, a man that believes in the rule of law and seeks justice. He is supported by the entire city, yet he parks next to a fire hydrant, within 15 feet of a fire hydrant, which is illegal. Now, I'm not going to say characters cannot be hypocrites. They can be almost anything you want them to be when you're writing, except they can't be inconsistent. But it is painfully obvious this isn't about hypocrisy of a character. This is about manipulating the world around a character to achieve a desired outcome. If this was hypocrisy, we would have seen this character park his car first, be told by someone he can't park there because of the fire hydrant, the DA tells him off as he goes to work, and we come back later to this scene to see his comeuppance. That would denote a hypocritical character. We don't have that here. What we have is a character defined to be good in the public image, breaking a law he otherwise wouldn't do. He's a lawyer. If they're going to break the law, they're going to do it in a way so as not to get caught. Him parking next to a fire hydrant is a painfully obvious lack of intelligence on his part. The writers double down on this character's lack of intelligence because there is a reason for this fire hydrant to be here. It's so the executioner can chop off a cap and have water pour out onto the street, crossing electrical wires and creep towards our district attorney. The executioner doesn't do it right away. He actually strolls out and stands between the car and the fire hydrant. What's the attorney's reaction? Just to stand there and watch. Why would he not run? This is Gotham, a city in the DC universe. He's a district attorney, someone who has without a doubt seen the masked criminals Gotham attracts. When seeing a masked man with an axe standing by your car, your instinct should be to run away, not stand in bewilderment. Yet that's what this guy does, until he sees the water from the hydrant slowly approaching him, carrying that very electrical charge, and it triggers something in this guy's brain to finally run away. But he literally runs away from the water in the same direction it is traveling. He doesn't sidestep to the left where the water would miss him. Nope, instead he runs ahead of the electrified water approaching him right into a chain link fence. What's even worse is that he has his phone on him and doesn't bother to use it to call for help. He doesn't put the phone away in the scene either. It is still in his hands when he drops his briefcase. To make things dumber, he doesn't run along the fence to find an opening either. No, that's too smart for this guy. Instead, he tries to climb over it. The water approaches, connects with the fence, and sends an electric charge through his body, resulting in his death. Except when he lands on the ground, his body isn't smoldering. His hands should be black and charred. Instead, we get something that is pathetically sad. If Batwoman wants to be an edgy and dramatic show, they need to beef up their violence representation. Not by a lot either. Just enough to stir a reaction that isn't an eye roll. Give us something shocking, no pun intended, to raise the stakes. Show your audience that the subject matter is dramatic and not funny. Because right now, especially with this show Batwoman, more people are laughing at it than leaning closer to the screen invested in the story. And when you're not designated as a comedy show, that reaction is bad. It allows me to teach any of you who are or want to become writers a very important rule. Never, ever make one character deliberately stupid to elevate another. Guile and wit are really entertaining. The reason we don't see any of that in Batwoman is because the writers don't have any to convey. So after that terrible intro, we get Daddy Crow spouting off exposition to Kate about Beth and where she was held for over a decade. But this isn't for anyone in the scene to learn. All of this dialogue is for us, the audience. Why do I say that? Because Daddy Crow is talking to Kate and only Kate, a character who learned everything Daddy Crow is saying in the previous episode. For Kate, this information is redundant. It's stuff she knows already. But if you want to update your audience, you need to do this in a way that makes sense within the context of the story and the characters. Daddy Crow should be briefing his staff, informing them about the situation. They've encountered Alice before, so why not give them full disclosure on the situation so they can be better prepared? It would be a better alternative because he would not be in his office but on the main floor, and it would also allow a better transition to the next scene, which is the reveal of the district attorney that was killed in the opener. This is what we in the film industry call economical storytelling. Take the information from multiple scenes and thread them into one really strong and effective scene. What happens between these two scenes is an update on last week's episode and then the start of this week's problem to solve. You can do this in a single scene, but Batwoman chooses to do it in two, which means you've wasted more time with your audience but also wasted your budget because you're scheduling two locations for two subjects that both don't require a lot of time to convey. The alternative I've suggest also gives a more dramatic flow to the story. While Daddy Crow is with his men planning a strategy for Alice, they're interrupted with a new problem that requires immediate action. It puts our characters in a dilemma. Do they focus on the problem they have a personal interest in, or do they uphold their larger responsibility and address this new issue? We are interested in people that are presented with difficult choices. We're also interested in the consequences of that choice. Does Daddy Crow continue to focus on Alice, or does he divert his attention to this new criminal? If so, how close will Alice get regarding her plan? How about exploring the added conflict of having Kate call out her father for doubting her in front of his employees? There's nothing more fun to write or for people to watch when you put a character in believably difficult situations. Right now, in this episode, we have an unbelievable situation without any difficulty present. Kate is in her father's office for no reason other than exposition, and when the scene ends, Sophie enters to segue into the next scene, which is the reveal of the murder from the teaser. Here, the writers insert what they think is fan service by naming the Joker as Jack Napier, an idea introduced in Tim Burton's Batman film and once referenced in Batman the Animated Series. This is a lazy form of pandering. It is trying to evoke in the audience the positive feelings of that movie and have them associated to Batwoman. It screams of desperation, and it wastes time referencing a superior story rather than putting in the effort to make their show rise up to a higher level. Daddy Crow is understandably upset about this murder and also not being informed by the police about the crime. But given the terrible track record we've seen the Crows have this season, if I were a cop, I'd be leaving them out of this as well. I cannot name a single success the Crows have had in this series, but I can name their failures. So far, in the 5 episodes that have aired, the Crows have had their lead agent kidnapped by Alice, who also killed 2 police officers, failed to stop a bomb in a park, have demonstrated pathetically slow reaction time when investigating the orphanage, have one of their agents defect to Alice's side, killed a suspect that could lead them to Alice, lost Alice during her escort to Arkham, failed to keep Daddy Crow's home safe from Alice, failed to keep a party safe from Tommy Elliott's elevator bomb plot, failed to keep private property and jewels safe from Magpie, and failed to arrest Alice again in the previous episode when they had her outnumbered. Yeah. They're really bad at their job. With the footage that is released by the news, Kate identifies the villain wearing an old-style executioner's mask, and when Sophie's husband, remember that guy? No, of course you don't. No one remembers him. Well, when he shows why the police didn't reach out to the Crows, but instead shines the bat signal, Daddy Crow gets really ticked off. This is good. We get some personal conflict from Daddy Crow. His ego has been bruised, and he sets out on a mission to prove to Gotham that, of all the failures he's had, he's still a better option to protect this city than the Bat. Sophie uses this opportunity to get another special assignment. I guess protecting Mary was a one-day thing earlier, but Sophie wants to investigate Batwoman. Kate sneaks off and heads to Wayne Enterprises, and instead of donning the cowl, she talks to Luke about how the DA that was murdered helped him put away a criminal that killed his father. So Lucius Fox was killed off-screen years ago. And while in the previous episodes Luke spoke of his father as if he was disappointed in him his whole life, here he speaks with sorrow and regret, as if they had a very positive relationship, spouting out a story of the two of them celebrating his high school graduation and acceptance to MIT. Where is the consistency? For the past 5 episodes, the audience has been informed that there was a significant tension between Luke and his father, and now all of a sudden, we're learning that not only has Lucius been dead for a little over 10 years, I'm assuming, but that they were in good standing as well. I'm well aware of how complicated family dynamics can be, but if you have a character who lost a parent during a night of celebration and in the first instant that parent is mentioned to the character, they respond with something like,
"Trust me, I am a far cry from my father,"
instead of how they miss them or try to live a life to keep them proud, then we as the audience would expect that they had a difficult relationship. But instead of following through with that established, defined relationship, we have Luke forget about how he disappointed his father and instead rewrites how they had a much better relationship before. Instead of following through with this brought up line of conversation, Kate changes it to who the executioner could be. Great segue, Kate. Thanks for letting us know how important this backstory of Luke's is by immediately ignoring it once he stops talking. We get an intercut of scenes between Kate and Luke, with Daddy Crow and Forgettable Husband during their search to narrow down the most likely suspect. Both teams find the same guy, a former boxer convicted of murder and sentenced to 30 years. Kate remarks how he is lucky he didn't get the death penalty. So the death penalty is a thing in Gotham? Is the Joker still alive? Because, if so, why? You know what? Exploring the death penalty being a thing in Gotham and how it would pertain to the Batman villains is a huge tangent I don't want to get into right now. So I'm going to put a pin in that and move on. Luke states how this convicted murderer was paroled due to overcrowding. What? He's a violent offender. In an overcrowding situation, the state does not release violent offenders. This raises several questions about the convicts in Blackgate. Why would the prisoners not be transferred to other prisons within the state? Is there a spectrum of violent offenders, starting with those that only murdered one person on one end and those that murdered hundreds on the other? If there was overcrowding, wouldn't they begin expansion as they were reaching capacity? Many prisons in the US are for profit, so the more prisoners they have, the more money they make. So would it not be in their best interest to be able to expand for higher occupancy? This would be a lot easier to grasp and understand if we got some details regarding the state of Gotham. So far, we know that it is relatively nice with a minimal homeless problem and not many frequent crimes on the streets. There is somewhat of a healthcare issue that results in Mary operating an illegal clinic, and we have one crazy by the name of Alice causing minor trouble to the Crows, but they don't seem to be creating chaos throughout the rest of the city. After easily handling Tommy Elliot and Magpie, there's not much else going on besides the executioner. Gotham appears to be very lame. I'm starting to think Batman left because he completed his mission to clean up the city and moved somewhere else to help. Kate is just kind of on mild cleanup duty. So, congratulations, Batman? While Kate plans to hunt this guy down, Luke displays a police alert that the executioner has some hostages in a building somewhere in the city. The Crows pick up on this transmission and decide to act as well. And here we get some more details about their operation. That the Crows are responsible for protecting a district of Gotham. Daddy Crow doesn't care that this crime is happening outside of that district. He wants to let Gotham know he can keep them safe. But is he doing this because it's the right reason, or is he doing this because he wants to expand his contract? We're still missing a strong motive as to why Daddy Crow is taking on this responsibility. He can't only be doing it because there's no Batman. We know quite clearly that he hates Batman, so there has to be something else to it. There has to be a reason why he started this company after Batman left instead of during Batman's initial time in Gotham. We cut to the standoff where Daddy Crow arrives on the scene wanting to take charge, but the executioner refuses to talk to anyone other than a specific cop. While they're chatting outside, Batwoman has snuck into the building, which appears to be empty. Before she finds the executioner, Sophie sneaks up on Batwoman and admires her outfit. Really? You get two women in a scene together and their first subject of discussion is fashion? Thankfully, they're interrupted by the executioner starting his torture of his hostages. Batwoman and Sophie run to the screams only to find several large speakers plugged into a recorder to fool the authorities of the situation. The cop enters the building ready to help and triggers a row of guns to fire. Batwoman and Sophie try to warn him, but it's too late and he's down. All the shots appear to hit him across the chest, so he should be okay as he's wearing a bulletproof vest. We see some blood spatter across his shoulders, but it doesn't appear life-threatening. Batwoman tackles Sophie out of the way, but she takes a shot in the side. Sophie recognizes that she's hit, and Batwoman remarks that she's bleeding. Well, yeah, that tends to happen when someone's been shot. Has anyone ever seen someone on the receiving end of a bullet that didn't bleed from the wound, especially one that wasn't wearing protective gear? Anyone? Please, let me know in the comments. It would be a fascinating story to read. Batwoman remarks about getting her help, and Sophie says, "Thanks, Kate." Cue dramatic act break. So instead of taking Sophie to a hospital, she takes her to Mary's clinic to get help. But this is a bullet wound. In the side. Those aren't typically done by a single surgeon. They typically need help with blood containment, stitching, or in the rare case, removal of the bullet. Not to mention disinfection, antibiotics, anesthetic. There's a lot going on that a single doctor would not be solely responsible for. What if there are complications during the surgery? What if Sophie goes into shock? Mary is the only one there. No, wait. Batwoman did this deliberately so that Sophie would die. It's a get revenge on the woman that dumped you and happens to know your secret identity all in one quick action. Batwoman didn't even have to bring Sophie here at all. She could have just left her for the crows and cops to find and tend to. Sadly, that's too believable of a reason for these characters to act out. Instead, Batwoman has to bring her here. She tells Mary that the crows don't know Sophie is missing and not to let her go. We are left to believe that Batwoman is doing this because Sophie knows her identity. Except, Sophie has no evidence to prove Kate is Batwoman. She just has an intuition. It's her word against Kate's, so really this is a false conflict. Yes, she knows Kate is Batwoman, and we as the audience knows Kate is Batwoman, but no one else in the show outside of Alice knows that or even cares. So it's really not a looming threat over Kate. What will happen? Sophie goes to the press and says, Kate Kane is Batwoman. And they'll ask for evidence, and Sophie will have none. So they'll ask for corroboration, and Sophie won't have any of that either, and that's the moment when the press will kick Sophie out. So in reality to the show, where is the conflict with Sophie knowing but not able to prove that Kate is Batwoman? There isn't. So this plot thread is a red herring. Had Sophie any evidence, then it would be something worthy of exploration, but because she doesn't, well, sorry, but who cares? Sadly, the way the writers use Sophie in such a contrived manner shows us that Sophie is a superfluous character. She doesn't bring anything to the story. She's supposed to be a love interest as part of a love triangle between her husband and Kate, but they don't explore that. They barely show the husband at all, and when he is together with Sophie, they're training instead of doing things a couple would do. We don't get Sophie or her husband running errands, going on dates, planning a family, or anything. They have a relationship on paper and nothing else. Because of this, there is no foundation to build a conflict, other than their marriage being a sham, but they don't even explore that possibility either. Sophie is a useless character to the show. She doesn't do anything or is asked to do anything. She literally has to request from her boss for 2 special assignments. It's as if the character and the actor are in perfect sync, demanding someone give her something to do. The best this show's been able to come up with is personal bodyguard to Mary, which they tossed away by the next episode, and now investigating Batwoman. For Sophie, what will it be 2 episodes from now? Still investigating Batwoman? Or will they forget about that and have her investigate Alice, or Mouse, or Catherine? The reason the writers are having such a difficult time giving Sophie something to do is because they haven't put in the work to define who Sophie is beyond her purpose of being a love interest. Sophie is merely a decoration. They put her in scenes to be pretty, but she doesn't really contribute. Her actions don't hold weight against the other characters she interacts with, and her motivations change so frequently between episodes that as an audience we're not sure who she is as a character. This entire sequence regarding Sophie going after Batwoman, getting shot and left in a clinic for the remainder of the episode is meaningless. It is filler, and whenever you see filler of this type, it usually means that they don't have enough of a story to tell in the episode to reach the show length. I feel really bad for Megan Tandy. She's given such a thin and meaningless character, and no matter how hard she tries to inject some depth to her performance, it doesn't resonate. It can't. Sophie is so shallowly developed and written so poorly that it's as if the writers view her as an afterthought. It's like she showed up to work, found there was nothing to do, and told to pretend to look busy. That's what we're watching. We are watching an actor who is relegated to act out a character pretending to look busy. If you think that's pretty bad, have I got news for you. Alice has her own little plot involving Mouse, wearing thigh flesh that was fashioned into a mask of an employee at Catherine Hamilton's company. Apparently, for one of the most advanced defense contractors in the country, they don't use a retinal scan, but instead facial geography for their security biometrics. Mouse is surprised to see Catherine and her staff in the secure laboratory, which is strange because 1, he's in disguise, and they don't know that, and 2, it's her damn company so he should expect to see her at some point. So stupidity aside, he's here to steal a gun that Catherine states can penetrate the Batsuit. Seriously? We're going down this story thread again? We were introduced to a gun that could do this in the 3rd episode. Now another company has made the same weapon? How were they able to test it? Is the material the Batsuit is made out of publicly known? Was there espionage at Wayne Enterprises? Are they certain it will do the job they need? Also, will this weapon really be a threat to Batwoman? She has that sonic disruptor on her gauntlet that took out the very same weapon that Tommy Elliott stole. What is the motivation for a company to design something specifically for one individual? Given all the information I have just stated, the writers have stumbled on to some dramatic irony, which is that Alice, who is stealing this weapon to coerce Kate, doesn't know that Kate has a deterrent for such a weapon. We know Kate does, and as a result we know that Alice won't succeed because of this. So in the eventuality that Alice approaches Kate with this stolen weapon, Kate will disable it and be fine. That is, if the writers remember that Kate can disable this weapon. If that situation happens and Kate doesn't use her sonic disruptor gauntlet, then we would have a contrived plot point, a manipulation of the characters and story to craft a deliberate action instead of the characters driving the story through their behavior. Now that won't be a rarity of this show. In fact, we're seeing one convoluted aspect right now with Katherine Hamilton. She has willingly admitted to her husband and daughter that she faked evidence to convince Daddy Crow to stop searching for Beth. Yet, instead of being arrested and awaiting trial, she's walking around building weapons to kill Batman. Daddy Crow isn't doing anything about it. There is a lot to explore with this dynamic. How did Daddy Crow and Katherine Hamilton meet? Was it through the search for Beth, or did they know each other beforehand? If so, was Katherine jealous of Daddy Crow's wife? If not, did she fall for Daddy Crow because of his determination to find his child? Was that behavior different compared to Mary's father? Katherine had to have had a relationship before Daddy Crow that resulted in Mary's birth. Was the father a bad match with Katherine? Also, isn't it odd that Daddy Crow would marry a woman with the same name as his surviving daughter? Sure, she goes by Kate, but that's an abbreviation of Katherine. Just imagine the awkwardness of calling out that name in the throes of passion and not trying to associate it with your daughter. I don't really want to go any further with that. If I'm able to bring up this many questions for potential story and creepy conflict, there shouldn't be any reasons to have episodes with filler scenes like we're getting with Sophie. There is potential for a bigger plot with Batwoman, a plot about love, manipulation, and betrayal. They could echo Hamlet with this show, but instead they spend more time on Sophie, a character that will most likely be fridged more often than being relevant to the show and these empty criminal of the week side stories. Speaking of side story, Luke channels some of what I'm thinking regarding Sophie left in the hands of a second-year med student while he helps Kate figure out the method of today's villain. Why is the method of execution different and important? Well, it allows our heroes to research and predict the villain's next style of execution. That is, assuming the executioner character hasn't stolen the materials he needs prior to them realizing this pattern. Once they determine the final form of execution, which is the gas chamber, they do a quick Google search learning where the gas will be held and where the executioner will strike next. Security for the warehouse is only a single guard. After all, it's only a deadly gas used by the state to execute convicted felons. Why make it difficult for the bad guy to steal by having more than one guard present? Batwoman manages to get to the warehouse first and approaches the guard to see if anyone has stolen the gas pellets before she arrived. Of course, the guard states that no one has been by and that they'd have to get past him, which he has never let happen, except for Batwoman, who managed to sneak into the warehouse without his detection. While learning that the gas pellets are secure, Luke informs Kate that their prime suspect has been caught by the Crows. Before Kate can leave and check in on Sophie, she hears an engine roar growing louder. As she approaches the loading door, a truck crashes through and hits Kate, sending her into the air. The executioner steps out of the truck, and we learn that the suspect the Crows caught is not the right guy. The executioner steps over Kate. I guess he thinks she's dead. I would too if it weren't a CW show. And he proceeds to steal the hydrogen cyanide pellets with ease. I wonder where that guard from earlier is at this point. After all, he had to have heard the crash and truck. Should he not be investigating that? I thought nothing gets by him. Luke calls out to Kate, and she reveals that the Crows got the wrong guy and that the executioner has the deadly gas. Kate returns to the Batcave with ice on her side, except she wasn't hit on her right, she was hit on her left. So was she hurt more by the floor than the truck? Luke is searching the security cameras to get an ID on the executioner's truck, but there's no luck there. That is until Luke remembers that the miracle that is the Batsuit records impacts, and he uses that to pull a partial license plate. Except somehow the suit picked up a license plate on the side it wasn't hit. She was hit on the left. It's right there. Kate and the computer graphics show the impact on the right. Did no one coordinate with the stunt team or second unit directors about what was going on? This isn't a nitpick like a watch changing wrists between shots. This is a plot device that doesn't line up with the visuals. It's bad enough that the writers are phoning it in on the story, but for the crew to not communicate with each other? Was there not any continuity staff on site? Should there not have been storyboards setting out what was to happen in the set piece for the actors to follow? I guess continuity is too much to ask for a show like Batwoman. Luke somehow gets his partial plate and identifies that the truck is owned by a former employee of Blackgate Prison who was once an executioner. We don't get the chance to follow this story, but instead take a break to catch up with Sophie, who is surprised to find Mary running an illegal clinic. Sophie threatens that if Daddy Crow found out about this, something bad would happen. But we know that's not true because his wife has committed several crimes personally affecting him and his relationship with his daughters, and she's still acting as if it's business as usual. This scene is only used as a break to allow us time to cut to Batwoman breaking into the executioner's home and to find on the coffee table the jar of poison gas with a flash drive rattling inside. Kate returns to the Batcave where they discover on the drive a confession from the executioner. But there's more. You see, The executioner feels justified because he has discovered that for the past 20 years the people he executed were innocent. To him, they all looked the same, had similar stories, and had the same 3 people address their case and determine their sentences. The executioner had been an unwitting tool of the corrupt. Now this is a really great premise. Not only for a villain, but for an antagonistic character, one who had a belief of doing good for the community and having that belief shattered due to corruption. There are a lot of fun and potentially great stories that can come out of this conflict, but given that we're around 23 minutes into the episode, there isn't enough time to really explore this idea, which is a shame because it is a really good idea to have. An executioner turning the tables on the system to kill those that sentenced innocent people to death? That's a fun premise. I'm putting aside the racial profiling aspect of this story just for a moment, because if a good idea for a story comes my way, I want to talk about it. This story has a lot of potential. Not only do you have an opportunity to explore the trauma of the executioner dealing with this revelation, but you then explore how he seeks to right that wrong. You then bring up a debate. Is killing those that sentence these innocent people to death the best course of action? Will doing that prevent others from sending innocent people to death in the future? Would it be better for this character to leak the evidence proving the corruption and having the system he believed in work for the people once again? Is the death penalty the best course of action now that we know innocent people were killed by the state? This is a show built on the premise of one person taking the law into their own hands. There is something cathartic about watching stories of this type. Batman is built off this concept and has lasted for 80 years. Death Wish follows the same premise, and so does to a certain extent John Wick. It's a story about a character taking action to right a wrong. Plus, we also like it when bad people face consequences for their actions. The mechanics are somewhat in place with this story in Batwoman. The executioner has identified those responsible and is taking them out. The fact that he has a confession recorded suggests that he doesn't believe he's going to live long enough once he's completed his task. Now we will bring in the racial profiling. Yes, it is a thing. If in the context of a story, so long as it is properly explored, then it will be relevant. So the question to you, the audience, that you have to ask is that after 5 episodes of Batwoman, do you think racial profiling will be explored and addressed in this episode? The answer is no, they don't. They should. Batwoman fails greatly with this premise. If you're going to bring in the concept of discrimination for characters in a show or movie, you as a writer need to address the motivation for that discrimination. It can be taught, it can be uninformed hatred, it can be jealousy or envy, it can be a misguided superiority complex, it can be virtually anything, but it still has to be something. There is always a reason for discrimination. It's never a good reason, but when you are writing about it, it is your job to have that reason make sense to the characters perpetrating the discrimination. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It doesn't have to be justified to you. You just need a believable enough motivation so that the audience can identify that this discriminating character is bad and committed to their cause. Does the show explore why the district attorney or this police officer had it out for brown and black people? No, they don't. They're trying to have the audience assume it is because they're middle-class white men. But I think, or at least I hope, the audience is smarter than that. Smart enough to not blindly assume hate from an entire demographic of people. Luke's part in this story also presents a conflict with such an assumption. Why would a district attorney help Luke and his family put away their father's killer if he were racist? Is it really about race, or is it about class? Is the question explored in the show? No, but it is a valuable question to address, as there are overlapping issues with both subjects of class and ethnicity. Frankly, the writers of Batwoman are playing with an idea that is too large for them to explore. It's like a toddler trying to drive a car. They probably recognize the steering wheel, the gas, the brakes, and how they work to move and stop the car, but they don't know how to turn on the lights, the wipers, or change gears. They don't know where to look when making a lane change or backing up. Because of that, if you put them in the driver's seat, they're going to do more harm than good. That's what's happening with these writers, which is such a shame because I like the overall idea of an executioner quitting their job and dedicating their life to hunting down corruption within the legal system. I want to see the bad guys be bad, learn their motives, and be entertained when the executioner comes for them. But sadly, we don't get anything like that. We don't get to see that they are bad. We don't get to see that they're betraying the people they've sworn to protect and serve. Instead, we're told they're bad. And because we are told and not shown, there's no impact in the story. I've said it before, I'll say it again and forever. Show, don't tell. If you have a bad guy, show me them being bad. If you have a good guy, show me them being good. If you have a hero, show me them being heroic. If you're just going to tell me about things, then I'm going to look at you as if you're a used car salesman saying anything they can to get my money. Show me something. And if you have to use dialogue, make it relevant to the visual and add to the overall moment. You say these innocent characters were coerced to confess? Not good enough. Show me how they were coerced. It's far more dramatic. You can show the actions and behavior of the cop pushing on the suspect. All it takes is a room, a table, 2 characters, and 2 goals. It's a very cheap scene to film, and if Batwoman is anything, it's definitely cheap. It's so simple. The cop wants a confession, and the suspect is trying to argue their innocence. You have room for trick questions, manipulation, stress, threats of violence, and yelling. All useful tools in writing that can allow the audience to learn which character they're going to support and which one they're going to despise. You can add another element too by adding in the victim's family and having them convinced of the suspect's guilt. These are not complicated dynamics, but they make for good drama. Heck, the opening scene has the district attorney on the phone talking about a witness coming forward with evidence. Now that he's dead, what's going to happen with that witness or the case they're involved in? Those sound like stakes to me, but they're tossed aside because they have to waste time with Sophie on a gurney. With all this new information about the real executioner, Batwoman decides to rescue the man the Crows took down earlier, and in the process delivers via Batarang the flash drive confession of the real executioner to the Crows. Why is the flash drive attached to a wing and not in the center of the Batarang? What if the Batarang spun faster than expected and the opposite wing went into the truck? Wouldn't the flash drive drop and probably get lost? Next, where is the guy Batwoman rescued going to be hidden for the rest of the episode? Is she going to put him in the Batcave jail for safekeeping until the real executioner is brought to justice? If that happens, will the Crows make amends with the guy they brought in? Will there be any follow-up about this wrongfully accused character? No, not in a meaningful way. And because of that, we know that whatever virtue signal or messaging these writers are trying to convey is disingenuous. And it's pretty bad when a writer tells a story they don't really care about or have a stake in. We get another distraction from the A-plot with Alice playing a game of checkers with that guy they kidnapped. He's reluctant to move his piece, offering to Alice that she can win, but she refuses. And to show how stupid this guy is, instead of moving another piece forward, he decides to move the one piece he needs to take out several of her pieces and be kinged. He has other options on the board, but instead chooses the one that'll upset his captor. That is just one stupid part of this moment. The other is that Alice isn't very good at checkers. And if she can't be a worthy opponent at checkers, how is she supposed to be a worthy opponent of Batwoman? Well, she hasn't been because she's failed against Batwoman multiple times, been caught twice, and almost caught 2 more times but let go. Still no explanation as to why. In fact, it's the Crows that's failed stopping Alice more. I wonder if she could beat them at a game of checkers. The game is interrupted by a phone call. Kate is on the other end. And here we actually have something of a twist. Because, like Alice, I agree. How would Kate get her number? Kate is not that competent. And because of how bad this show is, Kate having Alice's phone number could also be a plot hole that the writers would create. It took 6 episodes, but they finally got me wondering what is going to happen next. Not because the writing is good, but because there is a history of it being so bad, stupid, and implausible that things happening that doesn't make sense is part of the pattern. Luckily, I don't have to dwell on that question too long because it turns out to be Mouse posing as Kate over the phone to learn that Kate is Batwoman and that Alice doesn't plan to kill her as he originally thought. Now we get to the creepy part, where a grown man in his 30s acts like a child. I mean, it's not new in the show. We saw it with Kate in the pilot.
You spent the last 15 years pushing me away. You win, Dad. I'm gone.
But it's kind of redundant and removes any element of threat this character would pose to our hero. Even after he kills the hostage, I'm not intimidated. That hostage was tied up with nowhere to run. If that's the only way Mouse can vanquish his enemies, then he's not really a threat. Vesper Fairchild chimes in on her take of the story. This is the first narration in the episode, and she finally announces how Batwoman isn't really doing what the city thought she was. In fact, it's almost as if they're realizing Batwoman hasn't done anything all season to help the people of Gotham. Kate, instead of trying to find the executioner or find his next target, decides to pay Daddy Crow a visit as he's watching the executioner's confession. Kate is hoping that Daddy Crow will follow up with the executioner's video and investigate the judge he accuses, but Daddy Crow won't humor it. He thinks he has the right guy and that Batwoman interfered. Kate defends Batwoman, and Daddy Crow starts his speech about how the reason Gotham has these crazy criminals is because of Batman. How Batman is the root of all their problems. If he didn't exist, Kate's mother would be alive and Beth wouldn't be Alice. This starts up the old argument that Beth became Alice because they stopped looking. Kate says there wasn't any evidence, but we know there was. That's why Daddy Crow stopped searching. It was only in the last episode that we got confirmation that the evidence was fake and deliberately done so by Catherine Hamilton. She is literally the character to be held responsible for this upset in their family dynamic, and neither of them are addressing it. Instead, Kate talks her way into making an argument that Daddy Crow doesn't listen, and if he doesn't change, an innocent man will pay the price for a crime he didn't commit. But that's not really his flaw. His flaw is that he's incompetent when it comes to Gotham criminals. He's not wrong about who or what Batman and Batwoman is. He's not wrong that it's foolish for a city to put all their faith and hopes in a single individual. He's actually rather correct in that manner. When it comes to Kate, Daddy Crow is skeptical. And rightly so. Every time Kate makes a statement, she has nothing to back it up. She just comes at him with an "I'm right and you're wrong" attitude and doesn't form an argument to prove it. She's just a brat, and given that behavior, Daddy Crow has every reason not to follow up with her pontificating. This scene serves no purpose. It tells us information we already know. We get it. They stopped looking for Beth and she became Alice. Why is this scene about that old fact instead of addressing the one character who is behind the reason they stopped looking? You know, the actor playing the stepmom that gets on average 2 scenes an episode? Where is she in all this? Days have gone by. Is Daddy Crow and Catherine Hamilton still living together? Is he living at the Crow's HQ instead? Holy crap, I'm back on this topic again. What is going on with this Catherine Hamilton subplot regarding the Kane family? There's like 3 solid episodes of content to explore that subject, and instead, we're getting a barely half-baked corrupt cop racial profiling story. It's almost over. There's only 10 minutes left in this episode to cover. Sophie escapes from her bed. Mary argues Sophie has a habit of betraying those that help her or she cares about. She did it by dumping Kate and is now leaving to tell the world Batwoman's secret identity. But I guess Mary's argument struck a chord with Sophie because she's starting to think about her actions for the first time in this series. It's really not much of a scene, just filler to get us to the next scene where the judge is burning papers. Why would the judge only now be destroying evidence that implicates him instead of having done that immediately? No idea. We are led to believe these files pertain to all the people he's wrongly sentenced, so why would he have sat on records that would contradict his judgment? It's just another in a long list of examples of writers making other characters more incompetent to benefit the hero, rather than creating drama and fun obstacles for the hero to overcome. The judge doesn't get more than 2 lines in this episode. We don't learn anything about him or his motivations to do what he did. Racial profiling is a scapegoat, a means to grab someone and convict them for a crime they may not have committed to give closure to the victim and move on to the next case. It is a terrible act for any officer of the law. It is just as bad if the prosecution and the courts go along with that act. The reason it is done isn't only just for bigotry, although that is a significant part of it. The other part is that the justice system is overburdened. Crime doesn't stop. And every crime requires urgency and action. Every law enforcement officer works under a ticking clock, something the writers know nothing about. They have a very short window to gather their evidence and find their perpetrator, otherwise the chance of their escape grows larger with each day that passes. Those are the bad circumstances that the system faces, but those circumstances don't justify something as horrible as racial profiling. The system isn't perfect and it never will be. I'd rather have 1 guilty person go free than 10 innocent people go to jail. It's not ideal, but the alternative is to give up our freedom to an authority that will never be disciplined or responsible enough to hold such great power and control. That is the discussion a story of this type should start, but the writers do it in such a slapdash manner that it will never spark such a conversation. The opportunity was there with this judge character. It would have made a good dramatic climax to the episode. But instead he offers a bribe, and when that is refused, he runs. It doesn't help him much because the executioner is waiting for the judge in the courtroom, and Batwoman does her magic appearing act to stop him from bisecting the judge. Batwoman faces off against the executioner as the judge scurries away. Regardless of his obvious telegraphing with his axe, the executioner is a formidable foe that manages to knock Batwoman down and thrust the end of his axe into her chest. It shouldn't really do much with her wearing an indestructible batsuit, but he doesn't get the opportunity to discover that because Daddy Crow shoots him in the back. Daddy Crow unmasks the executioner to reveal the character who confessed on the flash drive. How does Daddy Crow respond? He admits he was wrong. He also tells Batwoman how him being able to do so allows him to be accountable for his actions and do better. Batwoman's response is to knock the gun out of Daddy Crow's hand and start throwing punches. The fight doesn't have time to go anywhere because a beeping noise comes from the executioner, and Daddy Crow finds that a heart monitor was rigged to the body and it has triggered a trap. Gas starts pumping into the courtroom and the doors automatically close, sealing them in. Or at least they tell us they're sealed in. Batwoman doesn't think to suggest going into the judge's chambers and exiting out of the window. After all, that's how she got into the building. But no, instead they just stand there. Apparently in Gotham City, their courtrooms have an emergency lockdown system in place. One that seals off the flow of air in the building. I can understand the doors having automatic locks. I mean, in the event that a prisoner facing trial tries to make a run for it, that can help prevent their escape. But it's not the only means for stopping them from escape. Typically, there are guards and bailiffs in the courtroom to also prevent those actions. This sealing off system seems like overkill. And no, I don't believe or suspect that the executioner could have arranged to renovate this courtroom to be sealed off himself. This was done by professionals, and given by Daddy Crow's response is somewhat common knowledge among law enforcement. So we have a set piece. Daddy Crow and Batwoman are stuck inside a courtroom that is filling up with hydrogen cyanide. Given the size of the room, it'll take around 10 minutes for the gas to fill up and kill them. Luke informs Kate that once the gas reaches 6% saturation, she can use a bat bomb to ignite it and save them both. Okay, good plan. So all these two have to do is hold their breath until that level is reached. We know Kate can do that for 2 minutes, and Daddy Crow may be able to do around half of that. But they don't bother to hold their breath. No, Batwoman takes this opportunity to talk to Daddy Crow about why he hates the bat symbol. Yeah, that's a smart idea. Have your characters do more breathing in a makeshift gas chamber. Daddy Crow admits that if he can't blame Batman for the family he's lost, then he has to blame himself, which shows us that Daddy Crow has forgotten everything Katherine Hamilton did to put him in such a guilty situation. Well, this gas hits the desired target, Batwoman throws her bomb and burns away the gas. The fire covers the entire room and she protects Daddy Crow with her cape. They don't give us a wide shot to see the rest of the room charred. They also fail to realize that even though hydrogen is flammable, oxygen fuels fire. There is also a lot of wood in this courtroom as well. While the gas may be burned away, there is still fuel for the fire, and if the room is an airtight seal as suggested, that would mean the oxygen would burn up too, and instead of dying by poison gas, they'd die by asphyxiation. We're going to ignore that for a moment because for the first time this season, the Crows technically have Batwoman captured. But we don't see the aftermath of that. Nope. I guess they let Batwoman get away, because we cut to a bird's eye shot of the city where Vesper Fairchild admits her assumptions were a mistake. Vesper exposits how Chris the Fist, that's the wrongfully accused guy the Crows captured, has been exonerated of his crimes as the city is opening investigations on the judge, the murdered cop. Murdered? I guess that vest didn't protect him from those bullets as it should. And they're investigating the district attorney to find any wrongdoing. This news affects Luke because he thinks that his father's killer will be set free. At least, that's what he implies. And for you fellow writers out there, be you experienced or not, allow me to remind you that, in the real world, if a judge or officer or district attorney are found guilty of corruption, that does not mean all the criminals they put away get a free pass out. What it means is that an investigation will be launched into their cases, and if any wrongdoing is found, those cases will be brought forth for review and a possible retrial. It's not as high of a stake as one would think. If you have a great story in your head that explores this conflict, do the research and see the real-world consequences of such corruption and the fallout. I promise that you will find much more interesting and entertaining story options than bad guys go free. The episode wraps up with Mary letting Batwoman know that Sophie escaped, and Kate returns to her dad's office to narrate to herself about not finding Beth when they could. Daddy Crow reaches out to Kate about how he won't give up on Beth again. Sophie comes in, probably ready to tell Daddy Crow about Kate, but after seeing them embrace, backs out. There's an end scene between Alice and Mouse, but it really means nothing. Mouse is just jealous of Kate, and it will follow the trope where he will try to kill her later on in the season. Alice will have to choose between Mouse and Kate. She'll choose Kate by killing Mouse, and then either Alice will become Beth or she'll take off and start a new plan. This is not much of an episode. It wastes a great idea because the writers never took the time to think about it or where to take it. The best advice any writer can give to another is this: write what you know what you write. If you have a fun idea about something you don't know too much about, write it down and then do the research. See if your idea doesn't conflict with the truth of the subject. If it does, rewrite the idea. If it doesn't, you may end up finding more opportunities to strengthen that idea and make it more entertaining. Either way, you're putting in effort that will be seen and recognized. The byproduct of these actions is quality. Batwoman has no quality, but it does have value. Watching this show can teach you as a writer what not to do, how not to waste a good premise, how bad pacing can ruin a story, and how on-the-nose politics without allegory can date a story instead of making it timeless. As a writer, you want your stories to be read, watched, or told from one generation to the next and still have meaning. Batwoman has no meaning, and I can judge that beyond a reasonable doubt. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.